The taxi pulled up in front of my house. My heart raw and broken hurt, much more than the wound they had stitched up on my belly. 20 days alone in the hospital, and now this house, my lifelong home, felt emptier than ever. My 5 children, where were they? They had promised me. My name is Robert. I am 70 years old. 70 springs and 70 winters, as I like to say. I have been a widower for 5 years. My dear Helen passed away, and with her a part of my soul went too. I was always a working man with calloused hands and a strong spirit. I was a carpenter, one of those who made custom furniture, the kind that lasts for generations. This house, every plank, every beam, I raised it myself with my own 2 hands. I thought it was a shelter, a nest for my children and grandchildren. I always put my family first, like an oak tree that gives shade and fruit without asking for anything in return. My 5 children. Richard, the oldest, always so ambitious. Sarah, the only girl initially with her lively temper. Charles, the quiet one, the one who seemed the most sensible. Michael, the artist, always in his own world. And the youngest Paul, the most detached, the one who went far away seeking his fortune. All of them my children, my blood. The surgery had been serious. The doctor was clear. Mr. Robert, it is a delicate procedure, but necessary. You will need absolute rest and a lot of help during recovery. That was when my 5 children came to the hospital. I remember the waiting room, the smell of disinfectant, the nervousness in the air. I saw them arrive one by one with their faces of forced concern, their measured hugs. Richard squeezed my shoulder and said, "Don't worry, Dad. We will be here for you." Sarah kissed my forehead. "We will take turns, Dad. You won't be alone for a single day." Charles nodded seriously. Michael was drawing nervously on a napkin, and Paul, who had traveled from far away, assured me, "For you, Dad, anything. I will come back as soon as I can." Their words were a balm for my fear. "Don't worry, kids," I told them. "As long as one of you is close, that is enough for me." I felt an immense relief. What a fool I was. I believed their words like one believes in the gospel. The first day after the surgery was torture. The pain was stabbing as if a blacksmith had hit my stomach with a hammer. I waited to see Richard the First on the shift list they had made themselves. The nurse came in several times, gave me medicine, checked my bandages. "Your family hasn't arrived yet, Mr. Robert," she said with a soft voice, as if she was used to that. "They must be on their way," I replied with a dry throat and shrinking hope. But Richard did not appear. Neither did Sarah, nor Charles, nor Michael, nor Paul. The second day was the same, and the third. The wound burned. The loneliness froze me. On the 10th day, the nurse, a young and kind girl, one of those who still have humanity in their eyes, asked me with a compassionate look, "Do you have family, Mr. Robert? I haven't seen anyone come to visit you in all this time." I felt a pang of shame that pierced my soul, more painful than the scar. What did she mean? Did I have family? Of course I did. 5 children, to be exact. 5 children to whom I gave everything. My time, my money, my love, my wisdom. I taught them to walk, to talk, to read. I gave them a roof-food education. I gave them my life, piece by piece. And now here I was, an old man, in a hospital bed, answering a stranger that, yes, I had a family, but for some reason that escaped my understanding, they were not there. I bit my lip. A bitter taste of defeat flooded my mouth. "Yes, dear, I have 5 children," I managed to say with my voice barely a thread. "They must be very busy." The nurse said nothing. She only smiled at me with sadness and adjusted my pillow, a smile that tasted of pity. The days dragged on, 20 days in total. 20 days staring at the white ceiling, listening to the noises of the hospital, longing for a familiar voice, a known face. No one. Not a single call that wasn't to ask how I felt, without the slightest intention of visiting me. The excuses rained down. "I have a lot of work, Dad." "The baby has a fever." "Right now I'm out of town." They all seemed taken from a manual. My heart was shrinking like a raisin in the sun, drying up of hope, of love, of trust. I felt like an old piece of furniture forgotten in a corner, a nuisance, a hindrance that was no longer useful for anything. The operation had left me weak, but the indifference of my children had left me broken inside. When the discharge day came, I sat on the bed, waiting for a miracle, a change of plans, a late appearance. But the nurse, the same girl, was the one who helped me get dressed, the one who brought me my few belongings. "Your taxi is already downstairs, Mr. Robert," she said. And there I was, a 70-year-old man recently operated on leaving the hospital alone, without anyone to open the door for me, without anyone to help me carry my small suitcase, alone like a stray dog that has been kicked. The taxi ride was silent. I looked out the window. The world passed by in a hurry, and I felt outside of it a forgotten relic. My children's promises echoed in my head, hollow, empty like broken bells. "We will take turns. We will be here, anything for you." What hypocrisy! Upon arriving home, the silence hit me harder than the pain of the wound. I opened the door with the key I had kept in my pants pocket. The house was just as I left it, tidy, clean, but cold, freezing. The air was heavy loaded with memories and a loneliness that cut deep. I sat in my favorite armchair, the one I upholstered myself years ago, and for the first time in a long time the tears came without warning. They were not tears of physical pain, they were tears of a wounded soul, of a betrayed father. What had I done wrong? At what moment did I become a burden to them? Had they forgotten everything I gave them? The sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the dreams postponed for theirs. Indignation began to heat my blood, mixed with sadness. It was a slow fire, but constant. It was not fair. It was not fair that after a life dedicated to them, I would end up like this, abandoned to my fate. My father always said there is no one blinder than he who refuses to see. And I, Robert, the carpenter, had been blind. Blind with love, blind with hope, but no longer. As my tears dried tracks on my wrinkled face, my eyes landed on an old photograph on the shelf. It was me, young, strong, with my carpenter's tools in hand, smiling proudly next to the structure of this house just raised. And by my side, Helen with her sweet smile, pregnant with Richard. I remembered the strength I had, then the determination, that same strength, that same spirit. Where were they now? In that moment, something inside me clicked. I was not a useless old man, far from it. Maybe my body was a little slower, but my mind, my head was still the same as always. The head of a man who plans, who builds, who fixes what is broken. I was not going to allow them to treat me like old furniture that gets thrown in the storage room. My children had been completely wrong. They had underestimated their father. They had believed that because I was alone and sick, I was a finished man. "Robert, have they taken you for a fool?" I said to myself in a low voice, my voice hoarse from crying. But a fool does not build a life like the one you built. A fool does not get ahead alone. A new feeling, cold and sharp like a blade, began to grow in my chest. It was not hate, not yet. It was a silent determination, an unbreakable decision. I would not seek revenge in the vulgar sense of the word. I would not scream. I would not beg. That would be useless. What I would do is use my wit, my experience, my power of observation. I remembered my grandfather's words, "You reap what you sow." My children had sown contempt and indifference, and now it was time for them to reap what they deserved, but not in the way they expected, not with a fit of rage, but with the calm of someone who knows what he is doing. I got up from the armchair, my body still sore, but my spirit strangely felt lighter. I walked to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water. While I drank, my eyes landed on the old wall calendar where I myself had written down my grandchildren's birthdays. Helen's doctor appointments when she was still alive, and at the time the shifts my children had promised to fulfill. All the days were blank, empty, without the initial of any of them. That was the proof, the physical proof of their absence. I could not change the past. I could not erase the 20 days of loneliness, but I could change the future. I could teach them a lesson, one they would remember for the rest of their lives. A lesson about the value of a word, respect for elders, and filial love. I'm not some foolish old man, I thought again, and this time the voice in my head was firm, clear. My 5 children, my 5 pillars, had failed me. Now it was time for the old oak to show them that his roots were deeper than they imagined, and that he could move the earth under their feet without even raising his voice. When the taxi left me at the door, the house seemed the same, but it wasn't any more. My eyes, which before saw it with the affection of home, now scrutinized it with the cold look of an inspector. 20 days of absence, 20 days of abandonment. It was time to take inventory, not only of the material things, but of the situation they had left me in. I entered with the usual key, the cold metal in my hand, and the silence of the rooms received me like a punch. "Here we are, Robert," I told myself, my voice barely a whisper in the stillness. "Just you and the house you built." The first thing I did was go to the kitchen. The fridge was almost empty. An expired yogurt, a piece of old cheese, a wrinkled apple. Not a soul had bothered to restock it, to ensure I had something to eat upon returning. Not a message, not a call, nothing. The calendar on the wall, which the day before had shown me the blank spaces of broken promises, now confirmed the negligence. I sat at the table on the same wooden chair I had made myself so many years ago and observed. The sink had a couple of dirty dishes from who knows when. Dust was accumulating on the shelves. It wasn't just the food, it was the lack of life, the total absence of care. My children had promised to take turns, but they hadn't even stopped by to see how the house was to water the plants or to feed the neighbor's cat that sometimes came to ask for food. "It seems they don't care about the ranch or the rancher," I muttered through a bitter lump in my throat. But I didn't let myself be carried away by sadness. I had already cried enough in the hospital. Now my head of an old carpenter of a man, used to measuring and calculating, was working. I needed data. I went to my small study, where I kept my important papers. I looked for my savings book, my bills, the house deeds. Everything was in order, just as I had left it. But checking the bank statements, I noticed small movements. My children had access to my account to pay bills, something I had allowed them for convenience. There was nothing directly illegal, but there were expenses that seemed excessive for regular maintenance. A couple of receipts for repairs at Richard's house, the oldest, and a transfer to Laura's account for an unexpected health issue of one of my grandkids that they had never mentioned to me. Things I hadn't noticed before, immersed in the blind trust of a father. While I reviewed the papers, my gaze stopped on an old toolbox I kept under the desk. It wasn't the big box, the one from my workshop, but a smaller one for quick repairs at home. I opened it. Inside, apart from a hammer and some wrenches, there was a small hardcover notebook worn by time. It was my notebook of carpenter secrets. Not dark secrets, but the tricks of the trade, the measurements of special furniture. I had made the blueprints of structures that only I knew. And on the last pages, with my handwriting already shaky from about 10 years ago, were noted the details of the expansion I did on the house. This house, the one I had refused to sell despite my children's insistence, was my masterpiece. I had designed it myself, planned every beam, every brick. I remembered the sleepless nights dreaming of the home I would give to Helen and my 5 children. And in that notebook, among other things, I found the original blueprint of the house, with an important modification I had made many years ago. The house had a basement, yes, but what few knew was that when I built it, in one of the pantry walls, I had made a double wall, a hidden space, a hiding place I had thought to use to keep valuable things, in case of some problem, or maybe for life savings. I never used it for that, but it was always there. A place where I kept some of Helen's papers, some jewelry she loved, and a small chest with gold coins my grandfather had left me. They weren't many, but they were valuable. A family treasure my children didn't even know existed. There was also something else in that notebook notes about a piece of land I had bought many, many years ago in a small town about 60 miles from here. A piece of land that all my children thought I had sold decades ago. It was a vacant lot at the time, but I always had the intuition that one day it would be worth gold. I bought it for pennies, thinking of building a small cabin for old age. I never did, but I didn't sell it either. I simply left it. And in recent years, with the growth of the city, that town had become an area of tourist interest. I remembered reading in the newspaper a few months ago that a construction company was buying land in that area at crazy prices. My children had no idea about this. For them, that land was an anecdote from the past, a failed investment of their old father. With these discoveries, a spark lit up inside me. It wasn't just the idea of a material treasure. It was the confirmation that my mind, my cunning, my vision of the future remained intact. My children had always seen me as the old carpenter, the one who fixed things, the one who told stories. But the truth was that I had built more than houses and furniture. I had built a life, a patrimony, with effort and with my head. In their youth and hurry, they had forgotten that the old oak has the deepest roots and the hardest wood. They had stopped seeing the man behind the father, the silent strategist who planned every cut of wood, every step in the construction of a home. I got up and walked to the window, leaning my hands on the wooden frame I had planed myself. The street was quiet. I remembered a phrase Helen used to say to me, "Robert, you are like the river silent, but with a force that drags whatever gets in its way." And she was right. Throughout my life, I had faced many things: years of scarcity, the loss of my wife, raising 5 children on a carpenter's salary. I had never given up. I had never shrunk back. And now that I was old, was I going to let them trample me? Not a chance. My children in their perceptions saw me as a fragile man, a burden, someone they had to take care of, out of obligation, not love. They believed my only function was to be the grandfather who gave them money, or the father who solved their problems. But I was much more than that. I was Robert, the builder, the visionary, the one who had raised this house with his own hands, the one who had known to keep an ace up his sleeve for hard times. I was the man who had navigated through life with more skill than strength, with more brains than muscle, and that head, that wit, had not rusted with the years. Maybe my body was no longer the same, but my mind was sharper than ever, like the edge of a good, well-sharpened saw. I remembered one time Richard, the eldest, wanted to modernize my workshop and threw out a shelf I had made with recycled wood, believing it was scrap. "Dad, you don't need these old things anymore," he told me without understanding the value of what he was throwing away. In that moment, I felt a pain, but I let it pass. Now I understood that this contempt for the old, for what was mine, was a constant in them. They underestimated me because they didn't understand my world, my values, my way of seeing life. But the devil knows more for being old than for being the devil, as the saying goes. And I, who had already seen a lot of rain, knew how the world moved. I wasn't going to scream at them. I wasn't going to reproach them. That would be giving them the reason, becoming the complaining old man they expected. My plan had to be different. It had to be like an underground current that undermines the ground without anyone noticing until the earth crumbles. I needed to move the pieces so that they themselves fell into their own trap. The resources I had rediscovered: the land, the chest with the gold coins. My deep knowledge of the house's structure and its possible hidden values would be my tools. Not to get revenge, but to teach them a lesson in humility and respect. So they would understand that a father is neither a blank check nor old furniture. The first step would be the land. I had to find out the real value of that property contact, a lawyer, maybe a trusted real estate agent, someone who wasn't connected to my children. But I had to do it with discretion without raising suspicions. Then the house. This house wasn't just 4 walls. It was the center of their greed, their expected inheritance. Perhaps the house had more secrets than they imagined, undeclared values or possibilities that only I, as its builder, knew. I thought about the possibility of renting the basement or even selling a part of the adjacent land that was also mine without them knowing. I started sketching ideas in the carpenter's notebook next to old blueprints and measurements. The idea was not to ruin them, but to make them feel the pressure, the vertigo of losing something they took for granted, something they believed belonged to them by right. He who does not sow does not reap, I repeated to myself, and they in their abandonment had sown very little. My plan would be like a well-oiled gear, silent and precise. Every move would be calculated, every word measured. There was no rush. Time, after all, was the best ally of the old, and I had 20 days of solitude in the hospital to meditate, to think about every detail. Those days that seemed like an eternity to me now became the foundation of my strategy. My children believed they had abandoned me, but what they had done was give me the time and motivation to rediscover my own power. A storm was coming, and they didn't even know the wind was already blowing. The morning sun crept through the cracks of my window, warming my face. A sensation of peace I hadn't felt for a long time invaded me. It was no longer the peace of the resigned, but that of someone who has found a purpose. My body, although still with the scars of the operation, felt lighter, more agile. It was as if the decision to act had taken a weight off me. No more lamentations, no more waiting. It was time to move the pieces. The first step, as I had planned, was the land adjacent to my house. That piece of land my children had always looked at with disdain, seeing it as a nuisance, a place to keep old junk. But for me, it was a canvas, a memory of when Helen and I dreamed of building a small cabin there for retirement, close to the big house, but with our own independence. That dream never materialized, but the land was still mine, in my name, something they, in their greed, seemed to have forgotten, or worse yet, ignored. I went to the old desk in my workshop, the one I had built 50 years ago with solid oak wood. I opened the secret drawer, the one only I knew, and took out the dusty folder with the land papers. Deeds, paid taxes, everything in order. The law was sometimes slow, but it was fair for the one who had everything in order. I put on my best shirt, the one I used for important occasions, and went out. There was no time to notify anyone, not even the neighbors. My plan was a chess move, and the first move had to be silent. My first stop was at the office of Mr. Peter, the town notary, an older man with more wrinkles than an accordion, but with a mind as sharp as a polished knife. He and I were friends since youth. When our parents sat down to play dominoes in the square, he received me with a smile and a cup of fresh coffee. "Robert, what a joy to see you on your feet. I heard about your surgery. How do you feel, old friend?" He asked me with genuine concern in his eyes, like an oak after a good pruning, Peter. "With more desire to live than ever," I replied, feeling that I wasn't lying. "I came to talk to you about a delicate matter, something I need you to handle with the utmost discretion possible." I explained my intention to sell a part of the adjacent land. Not all of it, just a plot that would allow me to have liquidity without parting with all my assets. Peter, with the wisdom of the years, listened to me attentively, nodding from time to time. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, looking at me over his glasses. "Robert, are you sure your children?" "I imagine they won't agree," he said with a prudent tone. "My children spent 20 days while I was in the hospital, without appearing Peter. I think their opinion on my affairs has lost a bit of weight," I told him, and I felt a pang of pain. But the determination was stronger. "I want everything to be legal, in order, but without them finding out until it is the right moment." "Is it possible?" Peter smiled an old fox's smile. "Of course it is possible, Robert. It is your property. You have every right to do with it whatever you please. We just have to be careful with the deadlines and the bureaucracy. I will do it. And don't worry, my mouth is a tomb. You know my word is worth gold." I left the notary with a feeling of relief, but also intrigue. It was just the beginning. As the days passed, I felt stronger. I started doing small improvements around the house repairs I had postponed. I fixed the roof leak, painted the front door. Simple things, but they made me feel useful, alive. My children, meanwhile, continued in their world. Not a call, not a visit. The absence was a deafening silence, but now that silence gave me the advantage. A few weeks later, Richard, my eldest son, appeared suddenly. I saw him from the window getting out of his car, with that expression of superiority that always got on my nerves. He entered without knocking, as if he owned the house. "Dad, how are you?" he said with a tone that pretended to be affectionate, but sounded like an obligation. "I was passing by and wanted to see how you were doing." "I'm doing, Richard. I'm doing as always," I replied, without stopping, sanding an old wooden chair I was restoring. I didn't ask him why he hadn't come before, nor did I reproach him for anything. I just looked at him, waiting. "I see you are busy. Shouldn't you be resting more after the operation?" He threw at me with a hint of reproach. "Work is the best rest for the soul, son." "Besides, these hands don't know how to be still," I told him, showing my weathered hands. "And you?" "Everything good with the auto parts business?" Richard shrugged. "We're getting by, Dad." "Things are tough, always uphill." He sat on the chair, looking at me with a mixture of curiosity and slight contempt. "Hey, Dad, you know, a friend of mine who works in real estate mentioned he saw an appraiser around here by the land next door. Do you know anything about that?" There it was, the first sign that my underground current was starting to take effect. The appraiser was part of Peter's plan to evaluate the value of the plot I wanted to sell. "An appraiser? No, son. I haven't seen anyone around here." "Maybe he mistook the land, or it was for some other property." "The neighborhood is always moving," I replied with a calm that disoriented him. "Maybe your friend saw wrong. With the sun so strong, sometimes things deceive the eye." Richard looked at me, doubting, his brow furrowed. Could be Dad, but it seemed strange to me. He was convinced it was this land. Anyway, life stuff. He stayed a while longer, uncomfortable, not knowing what to say, waiting for me to complain about something, to ask him for help, to give him the opportunity to feel like the benefactor son. But I gave him nothing. I only offered him a coffee. We talked about the weather and health. In the end, he left without the information he sought, and with a new restlessness in his mind. That night, while I ate a simple plate of lentil soup, I smiled. The fish had taken the bait. He hadn't bitten hard, but I already felt him on the line. Richard's confusion was the fuel of my plan. He wasn't used to seeing me like this, so independent, so in control. They expected the Robert of always the one who complained, the one who resigned himself. But that Robert had stayed in the hospital bed, alone, for 20 days, and he had returned different. The following days, my movements intensified. With Peter's help, I not only set in motion the sale of the plot, but I also investigated other options. I remembered the chest of gold coins I had found in the basement, my grandfather's inheritance. They weren't many, but they were valuable. I decided it was time to turn them into something useful. Peter put me in touch with a trusted collector who evaluated them and offered me a fair price. With that money, I opened a bank account in my name in a different bank than the one my children and I shared for house matters. It was my little treasure, my emergency fund, my independence. I also started reviewing the old blueprints of the house. When I built it in the 70s, the regulations were different. There were certain spaces, corners that could have hidden potential. I always liked the idea of having a studio in the basement with an independent entrance. It was a project Helen and I had discussed. Now that old dream took on a new meaning. I hired a trusted builder, a man of few words named George, to make a budget to equip the basement. I asked him for discretion, and he who knew me all my life nodded. "Mr. Robert, don't worry, my lips are sealed, like when I helped you build the secret wine cellar, remember?" he said with a smile, and I returned the smile. The secret cellar was a place under the pantry floor. I had built on a whim a small compartment that only I knew. My children had never suspected its existence. The work in the basement began discreetly. George and his team worked when my children were not around in the mornings and left everything cleaned up and traceless at the end of the day. The noise was minimal, and the basement windows faced a less traveled side of the garden. It was as if the house itself was conspiring with me. One afternoon, my daughter Laura appeared at my house with her children, my grandchildren, who were always my joy. But this time her visit had a different nuance. "Dad, what is that noise?" she asked me while her children ran around the garden. "It sounds like they are drilling." "Ah, yes, sweetheart. Just some small repairs I'm doing in the basement. Some old pipes that had to be changed. You know old house things," I replied with my most carefree tone. "The plumber is a bit noisy, but he is almost finished." Laura, who was always more suspicious than Richard, frowned. "Plumber Dad? And why didn't you tell us—" "We could have helped you get a cheaper one, or Richard could have seen if he knew someone. Don't worry, daughter. This one is trustworthy, and I have everything under control. Besides, it's a small thing. I don't want to bother you with my old man ailments," I told her, using the word old man, with an irony she didn't catch. Her gaze drifted toward the basement windows, trying to see something. But the curtains were drawn, and George was a master of discretion. "Well, Dad, but next time let us know—" "Okay, we don't want you to get scammed," she said with that paternalistic tone that irritated me. "By the way, have you thought about putting the house in someone's name? You know, to organize things. You are not a young man anymore, and it is good to have everything clear just in case. In case I decide to kick the bucket, right, daughter?" I interrupted her with a cold smile. "Don't worry about that, Laura. My affairs are as clear as river water, and I still have a lot of life ahead, thank God and the doctors." She fell silent, uncomfortable. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw a spark of fear in them. Fear that her old father wasn't as predictable as they thought. Fear that there was something they didn't know. The rumors started to fly, not just because of the land appraiser, but because of my small actions. A neighbor, Mr. Henderson, commented to me one day, "Hey, Mr. Robert, you look great, and so active. People are saying you're doing business. Did you win the lottery?" I just smiled. "One never knows, Mr. Henderson. Life always has surprises in store." My children suddenly started calling me more often, not to know how I was, but to ask to pry, to see if they could get information out of me. "Dad, is it true you are selling something?" asked Sarah, my daughter, with a tone of forced concern. "We worry about you, you know. We don't want you to get ripped off." "Don't worry, kids. Your father is no fool. I know what I'm doing," I answered them with my calm voice. "And if I do something, it's for my own good. The money one earns with the sweat of their brow, no one takes away." But the true breaking point when my children started to perceive that something big was happening was when they received the official notification. Peter the notary had sent a letter to each of them informing about the intention to sell the parcel, adjacent to my house for estate planning reasons. It was a legal notice, a formal requirement, but for them it was like a bucket of cold water. That same afternoon, the 5 children appeared at my house, altogether something that hadn't happened, even for my birthday, nor after my surgery. Richard, Sarah, Laura, Michael, and Paul. Wait text says Ana later in Spanish, but earlier listed Sophia, Laura. I will stick to Sarah and Laura and maybe Anne for Anna, if she appears as a separate entity, but usually these scripts mix names. I will use Anne for the Anna character mentioned in the confrontation. Their faces were a mixture of indignation and panic. It was the first time I saw them all at once since Helen's funeral. "Dad, what is this?" asked Richard, waving the letter in his hand as if it were a dirty rag. "You're selling the land. Why didn't you tell us anything that land is part of the family inheritance?" My children nodded their heads indignant. Their voices overlapped, each expressing their discontent, their sense of betrayal. "It's crazy, Dad. You can't do this," exclaimed Laura. "What need do you have, Dad? We can help you if you need money," said Aunt Anna with a condescending tone. I looked at them one by one. Their faces reflected the greed I had already seen in the hospital, but now brazen without disguise. I felt a deep satisfaction. I had achieved my goal. I had planted the seed of doubt, the uncertainty in their greedy hearts. Need children. The need I have is to live my life however I want, without depending on anyone. I told them, my voice calm, but with a firmness that silenced them. That land is mine. My name is on the deeds, and with my property I do whatever I please. Or did you forget who bought it and paid for it with the sweat of his brow? They remained silent, not knowing how to respond. They had come prepared for a confrontation, to scream at me, to demand from me, but my calm, my serenity, disarmed them. "And why didn't you consult us, Dad?" asked Michael, the quietest of the five, but with the same shine of greed in his eyes. "Consult. When I waited for you 20 days in the hospital, and none of you appeared to take care of me, to ask me if I needed anything, I blurted out, and the room fell into a tomb-like silence. That was the last time I expected anything from you. Since that day I decided I would take care of myself, and my decisions are mine." Richard tried to counterattack. "But Dad, that's different. You were sick. We had our things. But this land thing is a family matter, a patrimony matter." "Patrimony? What patrimony?" "The one you abandoned along with your father," I told them, and for the first time I raised my voice a little. "Look, kids, I have seen a lot of rain, and I know that you reap what you sow. You sowed indifference, and now you are reaping my decisions. I am not asking for permission. I am informing you." They looked at each other bewildered. It was no longer the old and weak father they had left in the hospital. Something had changed. My posture, my look, my tone of voice. There was a power in me they didn't remember, or that they had never wanted to see. "And don't worry," I told them with an enigmatic smile. "This is just the beginning. I still have many surprises in store, some of them right under your noses." I saw them exchange looks of concern. They didn't know what I was referring to, but the insinuation left them with a palpable restlessness. The confrontation had not been an explosion of anger, but a silent demonstration of strength. I had moved the pieces, and now the pawns on their board were starting to wobble. They left one by one with more questions than answers, feeling that the ground under their feet was no longer as firm as they believed. And I, Robert, stayed in my house, savoring the victory of this first round. The game was just beginning, and they, my children, still didn't know who they were messing with. The doorbell rang with an insistence that wasn't usual. I already knew who they were. My 5 children, Richard, Laura, Anne, Michael, and Sarah, showed up that afternoon, but not with the same arrogance as the last time. Their faces were paler, their brows more furrowed, and in their eyes the brazen greed no longer shone, but rather a mixture of confusion and fear. 2 days ago, the lawyer helping me with the paperwork, young attorney Davis, had sent them a formal notification. The sale of the small adjacent land, the one they considered part of their inheritance, was already a done deal. The money was already in my account, well kept, far from their claws. They entered my living room without waiting for an invitation, as they always did, but this time with a more hesitant step. Richard, the eldest, was the first to speak, his voice tense. "Dad, is it true what that letter says? Did you sell the back part of the land without consulting us again?" "Robert, how could you?" exclaimed Anne with a fake indignation that made me want to laugh. "That land belongs to the family. It is ours." I looked at them sitting in my favorite armchair, the same one where I had fallen apart in tears weeks ago, but now my eyes held no tears, only the calm of a deep lake. "It is not the family's, Anne. It is mine. It is in my name, and when one owns something, one can do with it whatever seems best." Or isn't that how it works in the business world you all like to preach about? Sarah, the youngest, who's always pretended to be modern and entrepreneurial, crossed her arms. "But Dad, that is abuse. You are leaving us with nothing. What are we going to inherit if you keep this up?" "Inherit," I repeated, letting the word float in the air loaded with irony. Inheritance, children, is built with work and values. And if you are so worried about money, Maybe you should start thinking about how to earn it yourselves and not waiting for your father to die to divide what he built." Their faces contracted with rage but also with helplessness. Attorney Davis had been very clear in his letter. The sale was perfectly legal. There was no going back. That land they had underestimated, and that I had kept almost forgotten, had now become tangible proof of my autonomy and their lack of power over me. They had believed I was a senile old man, easy to manipulate. But he who lives by the sword dies by the sword, and they were starting to feel the edge of their own indifference. Seeing their scolded dog faces truly gave me a silent satisfaction, the kind that warms the soul without making noise. The following days were a coming and going of calls. My children tried by all means to reverse the sale. First they called Attorney Davis, trying to intimidate him. He, with his calm but firm voice, explained to them again and again that everything was in order, that their father, Robert, was the sole owner and had full faculties to dispose of his assets. "The law is clear, ladies and gentlemen," the lawyer told them as he told me later with a discreet smile. "Your father does not need your permission to sell what is his." Then they tried to convince me directly. They came home more frequently, something they hadn't done in years, and needless to say, during my 20 days in the hospital. They brought food, sometimes even small gifts, trying to soften me up. Richard talked to me about a family project where that land would have been key. Laura insinuated that if I regretted it, I could get the land back by paying a fine to the buyer, as if I were a child who could have a candy taken away. "Dad think about it well?" Michael told me, sitting next to me on the porch with a honeyed voice I had never heard from him. "Maybe the buyer's scamming you. Why don't you let us review the papers? We could find a way to annul all this." I looked at him, squinting my eyes. Scamming Michael. "And where were you when that land was just a vacant lot full of weeds? Where were you when I bought it with the sweat of my brow, working from sunup to sundown as a carpenter? No one scammed me then, and no one scams me now. I know what I am doing." Anne, for her part, tried emotional blackmail. "Mom wouldn't be proud of you selling the family things, Dad. She always wanted everything to stay together." That really made my blood boil, although I didn't show it. Helen, my saintly, Helen, who had always been my support, my confidant. She would have understood my decision perfectly. "Do not use your mother's name in vain, Anne," I replied with a calm that must have scared her more than a scream. "Your mother would be proud that I fend for myself, and not that I let anyone trample me. She always taught me not to be a fool, and she knew that promises are kept, or they are worth nothing." They left once again with their tails between their legs. Their attempts to reverse the situation were not only useless, but each time they reinforced my decision more. Their desperation was my silent triumph. They had underestimated my capacity, my intelligence, my will. They had believed that because I was old, I was finished. But a tree that grows crooked never straightens its trunk. And they, my children, were crooked in their greed. And I, the old oak, still had many hidden roots. A few weeks later, I decided to take the next step. The sale of the land was not enough. I wanted them to understand that my house, the one they coveted so much, was not just an old building waiting to be divided. It was a living organism full of possibilities that only I, as its builder, knew thoroughly. I called a meeting in the living room this time with unusual formality. I asked them to come at tea time, and to their surprise I set the table with the good china, the one we only used at Christmas. When the 5 were seated, uncomfortable and expectant, I served them coffee and some cookies I had baked myself. "Children," I started with an enigmatic smile, "I have called you today to inform you of something important. As you know, the money from the land is already in my possession, and since money calls money, I have been thinking about how to invest it wisely." They looked at each other with a mixture of curiosity and mistrust. What was the old man up to now? "You have always seen this house as an old weight, something to inherit and sell." I continued, my voice calm but firm. "But this house, this is a jewel that you have never bothered to polish. You see it as 4 walls and a roof. I, on the other hand, see it as an opportunity. I took a set of rolled-up blueprints out of my pocket, old and yellowed, the same ones I used when I built the house more than 40 years ago. I spread them out on the table. When I designed this house, I thought about the future. I thought about how it could grow, how it could adapt to the needs of a big family. And in the lower part in the basement, I always had an idea. An independent space with its own entrance with good ventilation and lots of light that could serve for a small business, or even an apartment to rent. Richard frowned. But Dad, that is a basement. Who is going to want a basement? Not you, Richard, that is for sure, I replied with a pinch of irony. But there are people who do. And in fact, I already have someone interested, a young architect who is looking for a space for his studio and is willing to pay a good sum for the monthly rent. And not only that, the land I sold, the one that worried you so much, had a purchase condition. The new owner, a developer, is interested in building a small set of commercial spaces and has seen the opportunity to improve the facade of my house and restore the front so that it fits with his project. In exchange, he has offered me a maintenance contract and a considerable sum so that I can live here, calm, without worries, and with a substantial improvement to my property. The silence in the room was dense, almost palpable. My children looked at one another, their eyes wide. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. Their old father, the one they had abandoned in the hospital, had not only sold a piece of land without their permission, but was now planning to turn the house into a source of income, and was also going to receive an improvement at no cost. An architect's studio in the basement, Laura stammered, her voice barely a whisper, and a maintenance contract for life. That is right, Laura, I told her, smiling. My house is not just a house, it is an asset. And an asset, if you know how to manage it, can generate more money than you imagine. Besides, with the sale of the land and the rent from the basement, and this new negotiation, my economic situation is, let's say, much looser than you ever imagined. Not only do I not need your help, but now I am the one who has the ability to choose my own path. Disbelief transformed into a deep shock on their faces. It was as if I had shown them a side of me they had never seen, or that they had refused to see. The man who worked wood with his hands, the one who built this house with his own blueprints, had always been a strategist, a visionary in his own way. Only they, blinded by modernity and their own ambition, had not valued him. Michael tried to hide his astonishment with a nervous laugh. But, Dad, why didn't you tell us anything before? We could have helped you manage all this. Help me, I asked them, and my voice hardened a little. Children, when I was in the hospital for 20 days alone, waiting for a call, a visit, a simple, "How are you, Dad?" Where were your desires to help me? When the nurse asked me if I had family, where were you? No children. I don't need you to help me manage my life. I manage it very well by myself. And it seems that sometimes better than you. The blow was accurate. Their faces crumbled. The reality of their abandonment, which until now seemed to have been a minor detail in their lives, now presented itself as the basis of my strength, the reason for my independence. They had dug their own grave, and now I was bearing their expectations of inheritance under layers of autonomy and cunning. From that day on, the dynamic changed completely. They no longer saw me as that old man who needed to be taken care of the blank check that awaited them. They saw me as Robert, the man who did not let himself be overwhelmed, the one who had his own resources and his own plans. Their tone of voice was more respectful. Their visits, although still motivated by interest, had a nuance of caution. They no longer arrived demanding, but asking with a forced humility. The table in my living room, formerly the center of their greed, was now the place where I, the old carpenter, revealed to them that true wealth is not only in gold, but in wisdom and dignity. They had sown indifference, and now they harvested the respect they previously denied me. But this was just the beginning. There was still much to learn from my children, and I, their father, had the patience and determination to teach them the complete lesson. My house was no longer a tomb, but a lighthouse, and old Robert, its captain. And on that ship, now, only those I wanted sailed. Life after that storm had calmed down, but not in the way expected for an old man who lives on his memories. My house, formerly a silent nest, where only the echo of my loneliness responded, now buzzed with a new energy, a vibration that made even the old walls seem to breathe. The basement that place my children had seen as a dark warehouse of junk was now a vibrant architecture studio full of young people with fresh ideas and computers that blinked with the rhythm of a future I was part of. The guys, two young architects, Matthew and Sophia, along with a graphic designer, Camilla, had settled in with their drawing tables, giant screens, and unfolded blueprints. Every morning when going down to make my coffee, I listened to the murmur of their voices, the constant typing of computers, the soft sound of printers, the smell of fresh coffee escaping from the basement, mixed with the aroma of my own coffee, creating a comforting blend. It was a symphony of work, of creation, of future, and I felt part of it not as an old spectator, but as the foundation upon which all that was built. The contract with the young people was a resounding success. Not only did they pay me a generous rent every month, a sum that allowed me to live without worries, and even with some luxuries, but as part of the agreement, they took care of the general maintenance of the house. An arrangement for life, as I had told my children, and I hadn't exaggerated. If a leak appeared, they fixed it promptly. If a light bulb burned out, they replaced it instantly. It was like having an army of young guardians for my home, and all without me having to lift a single finger or worry about expenses. And the land I had sold, that piece of earth that had unleashed the first cry of alarm and the greed of my children, had left me a significant amount of money in the bank, more than I had ever imagined I would need. Robert, you have more money than a retired bullfighter, and more peace of mind than a monk, my old friend Joe had told me between sincere laughs when I told him the news. And he was right. My routine had changed completely. I no longer felt like an old man thrown in a corner waiting for the end. I got up early, made my coffee, calmly read the newspaper on the porch, feeling the sun on my face. Sometimes I went down to the basement to talk to the architects. I asked them about their projects, about the challenges, and they, with a humility my own children never had listened to me with attention. I gave them practical advice on the resistance of certain woods, on the best way to secure a beam, or the ideal orientation to take advantage of the light. Mr. Robert, you have a practical wisdom that is not learned in university. Sophia the architect told me once while I pointed out a detail in one of her blueprints. Her comment filled my chest with genuine pride. The respect I had lost not only from my children, but in a way from myself, had returned with force. The house was no longer a prison of withered memories, but a center of activity, of renewed life. The walls I raised myself with my hands brick by brick were now witnesses of new ideas, of new dreams, that were gestating under my own roof. My steps were firmer, my back less hunched. The surgery was behind me, a scar on the body, but not on the spirit. I felt lucid, strong, capable. He who doesn't run flies, I said to myself, and although I didn't fly, I walked with a new lightness, with the certainty that my path had not ended, but was just beginning to take an unexpected course. I had found a new purpose, a new reason to get up every morning with a smile. And my children. Ah, my children. Their attitude had taken a 180-degree turn, like a ship changing course in the middle of a storm. They no longer called me to demand, but to ask with a softer and more cautious tone. They no longer came with long faces expecting me to give them something, but with a basket of fresh fruit or a homemade dessert, a clumsy but visible attempt to reconnect. The first weeks of this change were, I must admit, quite uncomfortable. The falseness in their forced smiles was noticeable, the tension palpable in their words. They tried to be kind, yes, but it was as if they were reading a poorly rehearsed script without the slightest naturalness. "Dad, do you need us to take you to the doctor next week for your checkup?" asked Richard, the eldest, one afternoon. It was the same Richard who had left me stranded in the hospital. I looked him in the eyes, and in them I saw a mixture of poorly concealed shame and a convenience he still couldn't quite hide. Don't worry, son. The guys from the basement already offered. Matthew takes me and brings me back at no cost as part of the maintenance contract. They are very helpful. I replied, my voice calm, without a shred of reproach. He nodded, visibly annoyed, but said nothing more. The "at no cost" always hurt them deep down, because they knew that they, for their things, had never offered me the same. And the second one arrived one day with a Tupperware full of food. Dad, I made you your favorite stew, the one with lentils and chorizo. Thank you, daughter, I told her, accepting the container with a genuine smile. But you know, Sophia, the architect, cooks wonderfully. Sometimes she brings me prepared food, and other times we order something together. The truth is, I lack nothing when it comes to food. I saw how her smile became a little more forced, how the rigidity of her posture increased. They were trying to recover. They were trying to go back to being the good children they thought they were. But the road had become long and full of obstacles they themselves had placed. It wasn't easy to erase 20 days of abandonment with a simple stew. There was an afternoon when the 5 came to visit me at the same time, something that hadn't happened in years. They sat in my living room, the same room where I had revealed my plans to them. The atmosphere was different. There was no longer that feeling of assault of a trial where I was the accused. Now they seemed to be the judged ones. Dad started Laura, the youngest, with a softer and more sincere tone. We have been thinking a lot about what happened. We feel very bad about the hospital thing. We know it wasn't fair on our part. We failed you. Michael and Anne kept their gazes fixed on the floor, while Richard and Sarah avoided eye contact. It was an apology in their own way. Shy late, but an apology nonetheless. And I must admit, it touched my heart. I know, daughter, I told them without resentment in my voice, but without forgetting the pain. You had your reasons for not being there, and I had mine to act. Water under the bridge doesn't move mills, but it does leave a mark, and that mark, the mark of your absence, taught me a lot. It taught me that sometimes one has to fend for oneself. That a father is not a piece of old furniture that gets thrown in the storage room. They didn't look for excuses, they just listened. Silence filled the room, a heavy silence loaded with a regret that for the first time seemed to me something more than a facade. They realized it wasn't just the money or the land or the basement. It was the dignity they had trampled, trust they had broken. They had believed I was a foolish old man, easy to manipulate, dependent on them. But he who stays close to a good tree enjoys good shade, and they had moved away from the tree that had sheltered them all their lives. Now they saw me as a strong oak with deep and immovable roots, and that respect, that mixture of admiration and a veiled fear of what I could still do, was the hardest lesson I had taught them. They had learned that ambition without filial love is like a house without foundations. Sooner or later, it comes down. They understood that true patrimony was not only material, but also emotional. My story didn't stay just within the walls of my house. The neighbors, the people in the neighborhood, didn't take long to find out about the changes about the new life buzzing in my home. The presence of the architecture studio in my basement was visible to anyone. The young people went in and out with their folders, sometimes with large blueprints, others with models. The facade of my house, which I myself had touched up years ago, now looked more cared for, more beautiful. They had painted the moldings, repaired a small crack in the side wall. They had even put some pots with fresh flowers at the entrance, all courtesy of the maintenance contract. My house radiated a new vitality. Mr. Robert, you look so good. And how active your house is now. It seems like it is rejuvenated. Mrs. Rose, the neighbor across the street, commented to me one day while watering her plants. My grandson, who is studying architecture, told his father that this studio is very prestigious. Clients come with nice cars. It seems those guys are doing very well. Yes, Mrs. Rose, I replied with a smile. They are hard-working young people with lots of drive, and the house, as you say, is more alive than ever. Little by little, my example began to permeate the community like water filtering into the earth. The people at the retirees club where I used to play dominoes once a week looked at me differently. They no longer saw me as the lonely widower, but as the man who had known how to rise from his ashes. One day at a community center meeting where the lack of opportunities for young people and the abandonment of the elderly were being discussed, they asked me to give my opinion. I took a deep breath and spoke from the heart. "Look, friends," I told them, my voice resonating clearly. "Sometimes when one gets old, people think we are no longer useful, that we are a nuisance, a burden, and sometimes even our own children make us feel that way. But experienced knowledge, the wisdom of the years that is not bought in the market, that is pure gold, and if they don't value it, it's because they don't know what they have." I spoke about how I had felt the abandonment, the loneliness, and how that same loneliness had pushed me to search inside myself to remember the young carpenter. I had been the man who built dreams with his hands. "We cannot wait for others to give us our place, friends," I continued, my gaze firm. "We have to take it ourselves. We have to demonstrate that although the body gets tired, the mind remains strong. That we are old trees, yes, but with roots so deep they can break cement if necessary." My words found a deep echo. Several of the retirees nodded, some with tears in their eyes. After the meeting, many approached me. They shook my hand, thanked me. "Mr. Robert, you are absolutely right. We won't let ourselves be defeated," a man with a cane told me. Even the architecture studio through Sophia offered to help in a community project to rehabilitate a small abandoned park. "It is our way of giving back a little to the community, Mr. Robert, and demonstrating what we young people can do," Sophia explained to me. I felt proud. My small personal revolt had started to have a much wider impact, a domino effect that not even I had foreseen. People started seeing me not only as a man who had recovered his dignity, but as an inspiration and example of empowerment for other seniors. He who listens to advice does not get old, the saying goes. But sometimes the old man is the one who gives the best advice, the one who lights the spark. Sometimes at sunset, I sat on the porch, on the same wooden chair I had carved myself. I looked at the sky, thought about Helen, my wife, about her sweet smile, about how she would have looked at me. Surely she would have been proud. "Robert, you were always an upright man, a man of your word," she used to tell me, and I had kept my silent promise not to let myself be defeated. I remembered the 20 endless days in the hospital, the monotonous sounds of the machines, the smell of disinfectant, the suffocating emptiness of the visits that never arrived, the physical pain of the operation, yes, but above all the pain of the soul, the feeling of being a burden. "The sickbed is a purgatory," my grandmother used to say, and it was a purgatory that forced me to look inward, to unearth the Robert my children had forgotten, the Robert that even I had started to doubt existed. I felt like a ship adrift, without a rudder, without sails. But in the middle of that storm, I found my own lighthouse, my own compass. Injustice. Abandonment had not destroyed me, they had forged me like steel. Every cloud has a silver lining, the saying goes, and in my case it was the absolute truth. That loneliness so deep gave me the time and mental clarity to think, to plan, to see things from another perspective. It made me realize that my children were not my pillars, but that I myself was my own pillar, and that my value did not depend on their love or their attention, but on my own inner strength. My transformation had not been only external, visible to everyone with the money in the studio, in my basement. It had been above all internal. I had rediscovered confidence in myself, the cunning of the carpenter, who always looks for the best solution, the patience of the one who knows how to wait for the right moment. I had refused to become the grumpy old man or the pitiful old man. I wanted to be the wise old man, the one who, although gray hair covered his head, kept his mind sharp like a good saw. Sometimes I wondered if I had been too hard on my children, if the pain I had caused them by cutting the wings of their easy inheritance had been excessive. But then I remembered the face of the nurse, asking me if I had family, and the lump in my throat returned. No, it hadn't been excessive. It had been necessary. It had been a life lesson that perhaps they would never have learned otherwise. He who doesn't learn the easy way learns the hard way, my father used to say, and so it had been. I had to apply a corrective measure not out of revenge, but out of justice, out of personal dignity. The resentment that had been a burning ember in my chest, little by little, had turned into warm ash. I didn't hate them. They were my children after all, but I had set clear limits. I had taught them that filial love is not an acquired right, but something that is cultivated, that is watered with attention and affection. And if you don't water it, it dries up. My journey had been long and tortuous, but at the end of the road I had found something invaluable. Peace with myself and the unshakable certainty that whatever happens, I can fend for myself. My life at 73 years old had opened up to new horizons that previously seemed impossible to me. The idea of a legacy had changed radically for me. It was no longer just about leaving material goods, but about leaving a mark of dignity, of strength, of personal autonomy. I wanted my grandchildren, who now came to visit me more frequently, and with genuine curiosity, to understand that respect is not demanded. It is earned with actions and consistency. That work well done, honesty and wisdom are the true treasures. With the help of the architects, I had started organizing small carpentry workshops in my backyard, transforming the old shed into a cozy space. They were workshops for the neighborhood children, and yes, also for my grandchildren, if they wanted to come and get their hands dirty and learn. I taught them to use basic tools, to recognize different types of wood, to see the beauty in manual creation. It was a way of transmitting what I had learned in life, of sharing the trade that had given me so much. Knowledge takes up no space, and practice makes perfect. I told them while their small hands tried to sand a board with care. My children at first observed these activities with some suspicion, but then they saw the shine in their own children's eyes when they came home with a small wooden figure they had carved with their own hands and their grandfather's help. They saw how the children respected me, how they listened to me with admiration, and that I believe was another small lesson for them, one that sank deeper than any reprimand. They saw that their father was not just a wallet, but a living source of knowledge, of experience, and above all, of selfless love. The phrase, "you reap what you sow," had been fulfilled to the letter. They had sown abandonment, indifference, greed, and they had harvested an independent, astute father who no longer handed them his future on a silver platter. But I, in the end, had sown my own dignity, my resilience, and I had harvested a full life surrounded by respect, new friends, and new opportunities. My house, my old home, was not the end of my road, but the beginning of a new stage, richer and more meaningful. I felt like a captain who had weathered the storm, and was now sailing in calm waters, but with his eyes always set on the horizon. I hadn't finished my journey. I had learned that age is not a sentence, but an accumulation of experiences and wisdom, and that every day is an opportunity to learn to teach, to live with fullness and purpose. My children had to learn the hard way what it means to value a father, but at least they had learned it. And that for me was a victory, a small satisfaction in the long and complex road of life. I looked at Helen's photograph on the shelf, the one I had seen the day I decided not to give up. I smiled at her with tenderness. "We did it, old girl," I whispered to her, feeling her presence by my side. "We did it with flying colors." And in that moment I felt that my heart was at peace. Not for having won a battle against my children, but for having won myself, for having recovered my voice and my place in the world. Old Robert was no longer an old man waiting for the end. He was a man with a new purpose, and with the wisdom of knowing that life until the last breath is full of surprises, of new challenges. And for the one who knows how to look for the one who doesn't give up, there is always a new path to walk, a new dawn to discover. The old oak, far from withering, had grown new and stronger roots.